You are listening to the Two and Out CFL podcast, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
Grab some poutine and a double-double. It's time for the Two and Out CFL podcast.
He's got it! Oh, baby!
Every week, Travis Currah.
That's Grey Cup me, which is a different person.
And Brazilian Tide.
Punters are people too.
Talk fantasy football, bring you the latest in CFL news, and sprinkle in a little bit of nonsense.
Oh, nearly intercepted and it's over!
Ready, set, hunt!
And we have a special guest on Two and Out this week. It is Bruno Branco. We know him on social media as Pro Stats Canada. He's stepping out from behind the handle today. I guess now he's also an author. So Bruno, thanks for being here on the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, we're going to get to the book right away here, but first, I just want to ask you about your relationship with football and Canadian football in general. Where did it all begin for you?
So it's interesting because I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents are Portuguese, and I wasn't raised with North American football at all. We were European soccer fans. I remain a European soccer fan to this day. My dad still calls North American football the melon game to this day because of the oblong shape of the ball. Yeah, we don't understand anything about North American football where my family's from, but it's something that I probably discovered in my mid-20s in college. And ironically, I came to the CFL game via the NFL. So, it sort of began by, I would go to the gym, get some workouts in, and there was always NFL highlights on TV. I started following along a little bit, really got into the game, really started appreciating the intricacies of it, how you have so many different types of players, you need specific sizes for specific positions, just such an intricate game, and I found it beautiful. And at some point, this is probably, 2007-ish, I thought, you know what, we have a league up here. Like, I had heard of the Argos, I knew of the CFL, I had never watched it. So I started watching it and I fell in love with the CFL game. It's just, I found it beautiful. So many things about the NFL game that I found a little bit frustrating that I found the CFL game fixed to me. Like the touchback, like the NFL kickoff is probably the most anticlimactic way to start a game. Right? Yeah. I don't feel like returning this one. I'm just going to take a knee in the end zone. You're going to give me 25 yards for free and we'll start again, right? I don't know. These are the things that the CFL does right really well, and that sort of attracted me to it, and I just fell in love with the rest of it over time.
So from your background appreciating, I guess, European football, was that kicking game in the CFL probably hooked you even more, right? Because there still is that kicking element today that is celebrated in Canadian football.
Yeah, the kicking element is actually an important part of Canadian football, and that's something that I really appreciate, and how special teams is a legitimate third of the game, right? It's not like an afterthought like it is in the NFL. So coming from Portuguese background, we love kicking balls, so it's a win-win for us.
Now on social media with Pro Stats Canada, and now I'll be honest, some of this stuff kind of flies over my head, but you analyze the game a little bit with production ratings, right? And you've been releasing those stats for a few seasons now. How did you get so deep into the game and analyzing it that way?
So it's funny because I don't have a statistical background, right? My profession, I'm a police officer. So by nature, I investigate things, I follow evidence and see where it leads. And I just started I created this little, basically I call it a comparative performance evaluation algorithm, just a complicated set of words to mean a series of calculations that I do that sums up a player's production into one single number, right? I was sort of trying to, at the time, be the PFF of the CFL. They weren't involved with the CFL at the time, and I really appreciate sort of a little bit more of an in-depth analysis of the game that they do. And I thought it would be cool for CFL fans to have something like that as well. And I just got started with that and sort of been building off of it ever since. And basically, I'm rating their statistical production. So unlike PFF, that's basically doing plays over expected or whatnot. They do a different type of evaluation. I'm just rating their statistical output because at the end of the day, a player is making 12 tackles a game. That's a heck of an output, any way you slice it, right?
Yeah. Now, the book, Bush League, if they were good enough, they'd be in the NFL, which when I see that title, and I think anybody listening to the show, we're probably preaching to the choir a little bit. I mean, we know that we're fans of the CFL, we're diehards, we're listening to podcasts and consuming all that content. And I think your story is interesting in the way I think a lot of Canadians maybe they discover the CFL, they go to their first pro football game in a CFL stadium, and then maybe they see the NFL on TV, but you kind of went the opposite way. And so you had an appreciation, I think, for the athletes, no matter what game they were playing, American or Canadian. What point did you decide you had to put this in a book to sort of prove how good Canadian Football League players actually are?
So I'm Torontonian born and raised, as you can see, repping the hometown team here. And in this area of the country, unlike other areas of the country who do respect the CFL and do appreciate it for its quality, there's this sentiment here, and it ultimately became the subtitle of my book that, oh, if they were good enough, they'd be in the NFL. So a lot of NFL snobs in this area, whether I like to say it or not, that's the truth, right? And no matter how many conversations I had with people, they would always resort to this, what I ultimately dubbed the haters mantra, right? If they were good enough, they'd be in the NFL. That sort of ends the argument. There's no debate. If they were good enough to be there, that's that. They must suck because they're here. And it bothered me because, like, I'll give you a quick example. When I started my career as a police officer, one of the guys that came in with me was a former CFLer. Now, I'll keep his name out of it, but this guy, during his playing career, was a backup DB, basically all the teams he played at, mainly specials. This guy was chiseled out of marble. I had never seen such a specimen in my life. And while this dude is towering over me, and I'm like, you are a backup in the CFL? Like, oh, good Lord. Like, that's an athlete and a half that's not being used on a team. I'm like, what do they got down there? Like, what kind of athletes are playing the CFL? And that sort of really, really opened my eyes to the caliber of athletes we actually do have playing here. And again, I wanted to sort of debunk this idea. And like you said, it is preaching to the choir because a lot of us do know, and people who really do know football, they can appreciate that, football is a spectrum, and the reality is in the NFL, there's only certain amount of positions, period. Just because they're not there doesn't mean they don't have the ability to be there, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that has to line up right for them to get that opportunity, right? And so I wrote this book as sort of a factual, just a way to present evidence to those naysayers.
Yeah, and I think that's the fascinating thing is that you're backing it up with some measurables, right? From the ground up, just to show how good these players actually are. You kind of spoke about it a little bit, but what are some myths about CFL players that just drive you crazy?
Well, that a good U.S. high school team could beat a CFL team, right?
Yeah.
Any team in the NCAA, SEC team, Alabama would dominate the CFL type of thing. That's horse crap. Pardon the expression. Like, it's just not true. You're talking about grown men, professional grown men against, albeit highly talented, children. They're kids, right? They're just not. They're just not there yet. So aside from the that mentality that the general population has, I think a lot of that is brought on by just how powerful the NFL is as a brand, right? Because their level of production is fantastic, right? They make all their
Unmatched, yeah.
players appear to be larger than life. The reality is there's no sports league on planet Earth in any sport that comes close to the revenue of the NFL. It's the world's behemoth. So to compare it from a production standpoint or anything like that, or a financial standpoint, you're going to say, well, I believe the gap is as big as their financial gap. And that's just not true. So again, that's where I started with all this, and even more important than all the data, which I do believe backs up a lot of it, is the statements. There's a lot of quotes in the book that I've collected over the years from players, coaches, GMs, people that have actually been involved in both leagues, and what they actually have to say about it. I had the opportunity to briefly chat with Deontay Spencer, Delvin Breaux, and guys that have been there and done that. When they say something, I'm going to listen, right? I never played it down in my life. But these guys that have been there and done that in both leagues can actually say, you know what, based on our experience, this is what we believe. And I've included a lot of that in the book as well.
Yeah, I think the players know. I think the front offices know throughout football, but getting through to fans or everyday people, it almost sometimes feels like a fool's errand. And I appreciate that you put the work in and made a book out of it, because sometimes CFL fans, I think we have a bit of a complex where we feel like we need to defend the league and defend the game. And it becomes exhausting sometimes, and sometimes it's just well, let people think what they think, but at the same time we want to get through to them because we want to grow the game. We want people to respect the CFL here. And when you talk to guys like Spencer and Breaux, those are some great examples. And if I remember correctly, Delvin Breaux had some misdiagnosed injury issues that took him out of the NFL, and he probably would have stuck there if they would have figured that out properly. So there's a lot more that goes into a player making it in the NFL than just talent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I address this in the book as well, and there's numerous examples of situations that will cause a player to stick or not stick. Like one of my profile players, Andrew Hawkins, I'm quoting him as saying, there's a thin line between starting in the NFL and working in a factory. One bad decision and I'm on the wrong end of it, right? Those are not my words. That's Hawkins' words. This is a guy that played in the CFL, had quite a lengthy and successful NFL career as well. And in the book, I examine factors like, for example, people don't think about it, but nerves, for example. An athlete is superhuman in many aspects, but they're still subject to the same human tendencies as anybody else. Sometimes when their number is called and the lights are on as bright as they are down there, they just freeze or they don't play up to their potential. And in the NFL, you got to bring it right the heck now. There's no leeway there. If you're not a first or second round draft pick, you're not getting another chance. If you don't impress immediately on your first, that's the end of it, probably your last. There's a sunk cost fallacy, which I go into in a bit of detail as well, in the sense of a player is drafted by a team. That team has invested some significant capital in them already, right? They've got some guaranteed money in their contract. A player might come along, perhaps from the CFL, that shows potential, perhaps playing at a very comparable level to that player. If they have to choose between the two, we know who they're going to choose, the one who they invested in already, right? They're going to have to get a return on that investment. And that's something that a lot of times people don't really consider, but plays a pretty significant role, echoed by some statements from players in the book as well about that. Injuries, you'll have a player like take John Mechie, who drafted to the Texans. His first season was completely out from an injury, and now he's sort of coming back. But like heaven forbid he suffers an injury now that's going to sideline him for the whole second season. He's been in the NFL 3 years. He's going to have no tape to show for it, right? At some point, somebody's going to lose faith, maybe cut him. Does that mean he couldn't play? It just meant he ran into some pretty significant injury trouble. Trouble with the law. Casualty of the numbers game, right? You got 53 men you got to keep on that roster. And sometimes you got to make some real hard decisions to say, well, I'd like to keep you, but we really need this elsewhere. So unfortunately, you can't stay. It's as simple as that. And also small school bias, which, it is a real thing. That if you have two players that ultimately are playing comparably, you're going to have one player that played at Bama and the other player that played in some FCS level school. They're probably going to say, tit for tat, I'm going to choose the Bama guy instead of the FCS level school guy who potentially could have had a much higher potential, but at the end of the day is never going to get the chance to show it, right? So there's so many things involved, so many things that have to line up correctly for a player to actually get an opportunity to show what he can do. It's not as simple as all that.
Yeah, any big sports league, whether it's Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, it takes a lot for a player to make it. And I would say players probably progress in their career at different paces. Like a player might hit his prime and his peak at 26 or 27 years old. Well, that's 4 years removed from university. And a lot of times the NFL's not patient enough to wait that 4 years, right?
Yeah. So the an aspect that has been sort of, we don't really think about, but the NFL is not paid to develop players, right?
Yeah.
Coaches are not paid to develop players. They're paid to win games right now. So if you don't come in ready to win right now, they'll move on to the next one because somebody else will be ready right now. Maybe that player need a little bit more time. I mean, in the book, I quote Bucky Brooks, who says that in reality, it takes about 3 years to figure out if a guy can play or not at the NFL
Mm.
level. Now, like you said, most guys are not getting 3 years to figure that out. First and second round picks perhaps will. If you're a fourth, fifth, sixth, or undrafted free agent, you're not getting anywhere near that. So unless you bring it immediately and are able to, draw the coach's eye away from the incumbents, players with a previous NFL experience already under their belts, or draft picks that they already invested so much money and time in, your chances of making the league are very, very slim, and it has nothing to do with your talent or lack thereof. It's just the whole set of circumstances that are essentially conspiring against you at that point.
I know you go in depth in the book about this, but what are the metrics you use to compare players on both sides of the border to prove how good the Canadian football athletes actually are?
So the concept is relatively simple. It's I figured let's analyze how, because you don't have interleague play, neither will we ever have interleague play. So we will never be able to know how they fare head to head. But let's take how a player performed in the CFL, what level they played at, and when they play in the NFL, let's see how they played in the NFL and what level they played at compared to their peers there. Because the idea is that if you were to take, let's say I play beer league hockey, right? And I'm darn good in my beer league and I'm scoring 3 goals a game. But if you take me and put me in the AHL, my production is inevitably going to decline because I'm not as good as those guys. I'm going to look out of place. So it's sort of using that same idea that if you take a CFL player that was an all-star, you put him in the NFL and he has the same amount of opportunities to play, what does that look like, right? Is there a decline? And if so, how big is that decline? And that was the idea that I had in being able to compare. Essentially, I'm comparing a player to himself. What was he able to do in the CFL? How did he rank in the CFL against his peers? And what did he do in the NFL? And who did he compare to in the NFL? That sort of gives us a little bit more of a balanced perspective about things. Because any CFL NFL comparison, to some people, it's sacrilege. I shouldn't even be talking about this. You can't compare them; they're incomparable. But that's just not true, right? The rules are different. Yes, there are different nuances to the game. Yes, there are lots of things that make the games different, and they are in fact different. But it is a comparable game. Ask anybody who's played both of them, and they'll tell you, right? Football is football. So I'll use an example. Delvin Breaux, who we've already spoken about. So 2014 season, playing CFL All-Star level ball, right? Transitions to the NFL, very next season, starting corner for the New Orleans Saints. Now, he goes 1v1 against Julio Jones, right? In this game, man coverage. This is Julio Jones, probably the best season of his career, ends up with 1,800 yards. He's averaging 116 receiving yards a game. This dude is like the upper echelon of the NFL. Now, I actually have a video that I posted on my social about this. Somebody else compiled it, and I just sort of reposted it there. And when we watch Delvin Breaux, Julio Jones 1v1, does Delvin look out of place? He doesn't look out of place. He held him to 93 yards with no touchdown. So he held him to a below average performance for that season. And this is the NFL's absolute best receiver. So that would sort of leave me scratching my head if I'm an naysayer to say, well, if this dude was a CFLer and he's defending literally the best receiver the NFL has to offer, and he's making him look pretty average, right? Average for Julio standards.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the idea to give people a little bit more of a perspective.
Would you say that there are certain positions that translate better? on both sides of the border. Like, I feel like if a cornerback in the CFL can shut down guys with a waggle, I feel like going to the NFL, while there's probably with the smaller field, different angles, different leverages that they want to use when covering a receiver, I feel like that would be a head up. If you can cover receivers with a running start, you might do okay in the American game.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, but even something from the perspective of the player sizes. I did an in-depth examination of player sizes per position and compared them in both leagues. And there are some that are actually basically equal, and that's defensive backs, wide receivers. I would hypothesize that the vast majority, if you're good in the CFL, you'd be pretty good in the NFL as well, just even from a size perspective. Like you said, that's the point that oftentimes is not talked about. But when you're guarding dudes with a running start, and now you're guarding dudes static, it does translate well. And most of the dudes that can make the transition easiest are going to be those, in my opinion, wide receivers and defensive backs. And then you have the polar opposite end of the spectrum, which is the D line. Now, the D line, noticeable difference in terms of weight, a little bit of height, especially NFL defensive interior guys. CFL basically doesn't use guys that big. NFL defensive ends are basically CFL defensive interior. CFL defensive ends are NFL linebackers. CFL linebackers are sort of like NFL safety size. So there are definite size discrepancies there, and they're pretty substantial. But generally speaking, a player's transition can be made easier or more difficult, and part of that has to do with like the sizes as well, like I said, which is something that's not often thought of.
Was there anything you discovered while researching the book that surprised you, even opened your eyes a little bit?
Well, I think basically that the masses are dead wrong about the quality of play in the CFL. Like, I didn't approach this from the perspective of a CFL fanboy trying to find corroborating evidence. I started this project probably 10 years ago, right? As a genuinely curious football fan, a fan of both leagues, interested in understanding the differences in the game and the difference in level of play. And the more I looked into it, and the more opinions of actual experts that I learned about, I became surprised to understand that the gap is so much smaller than the finances and the glitz and glamour of the NFL would imply. And I think that's what really did surprise me, was in fact how high the level of play in the CFL really is.
Now, this is a big question, and you may not have the answer. I don't know if anybody has the answer. But how do we get through to the naysayers in Toronto or anywhere else in Canada? That seems like maybe the tallest task of them all.
So it's funny because I've had this conversation with Micah Awe, and he agrees. I agree with him that it's basically just knowledge. We just have to keep providing knowledge, and that's what I intended to do with this book, was to say, look, this is the truth. These are the facts. Whether you want to hate the CFL or not, that's entirely up to you. You don't have to like it. That's fine. But you can't say that there's no talent here, because there is, and I've proven, right? It's proven, objectively proven. Nobody's ever done anything like this before. So I thought, you know what? I might be the first. Maybe I'm a crackpot. I don't know. But I'm going to put it out there, and you can continue to hate, but you're not going to be able to say there's no talent, because I've just proven that there is, right? We just got to keep the knowledge ball rolling. That's all.
Bush League, if they were good enough, they'd be in the NFL. Bruno, thanks so much for joining us. Where can we buy the book? Is it anywhere? Is it certain spots online, or whereabouts?
It's on Amazon. If you search Bush League on Amazon, you'll find it.
Hey, all about that Prime delivery, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I also have the links on my socials, on PSC's channels on Instagram and Twitter. So anybody who follows me can go there and check it out as well through the links there.
Awesome. Thanks for stepping out from behind the curtain and talking about this book and giving us that great insight you've been working on for a decade or more. Thanks for coming on the show, Bruno.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Find more great shows like this at CF Pod Network on Twitter.